Hello and welcome in to the discussion today. And today I want to cover the topic of what is the Brahman. And we've been going into a lot of related topics about the Brahman in our other streams with comparisons to Celtic equivalents such as Breoghan, Trefilneamh, and Ainda, of course. But some of the core details are left up in the air unless we give a good example, a good explanation and description of what we're talking about when we say the Brahman. And even more interesting to me is drilling down to the etymology and the sort of consensus of the etymology of Brahman, what that is, what that goes back to in Proto-Indo-European, as well as that's one question. What is just the form? What is the word that it goes back to in Proto-Indo-European? And the second question is what that word actually meant in Proto-Indo-European and also in early Sanskrit, Vedic Sanskrit. So those are all going to be things I want to look at. But in particular, I'm going to be presenting a specific angle on this question, of course, so I want to make that clear, which is based on the work of Jan Gonda, first and foremost. So essentially, when you approach a question like this, of course, you have a bunch of scholars with different arguments. It's a contested question, right? And I'm not presenting myself here as a linguist or Indologist. But what I'm presenting, why I'm taking my position, is because of comparative mythology, which is what I have a focus on. And so because we have certain comparative material in Ireland with Breoghan, as well as Latin linguistic cognate with this same meaning that Gonda also touches on. Certain details like this give support to the argument Gonda was making, which is for a particular meaning of this word originally, and that is at variance with other scholars. So my point is, I'm throwing my lot in with Gonda to present his side of the argument, and that is reinforced by my arguments from comparative mythology and all of that. Okay, so if that makes sense, we can just get started and you'll see what I mean. Secondly, I'm going to present some linguistic material. And again, I'm not a linguist, but this is from Jan Gonda, and I'll do my best to present it fairly. So, forgive me if I make errors in the presentation, but I'm going to show you what he's talking about, as well as there are certain, everyone watching this channel knows Josephus, my colleague, as well as I also refer to another colleague, Bo and Sir, and these folks are much more linguistically knowledgeable, and they have contributed to this question and to some of the material that I'm presenting. So I want to sort of preface that I am a comparative mythology focus, and that's my angle, that my strength. And then I have other people who are more like advisors on linguistic material. I want to hopefully present that material fairly. If there are errors that I make, that's attributable to me, of course, and hopefully you can take that from that perspective, right? As much as possible. Okay, so let's go into the material. So this is from Jan Gonda. I want to reiterate that or state that Jan Gonda, he's not just any scholar, I would say. He's more like, one of the handful of the greatest Indologists of the 20th century. So what his strength is that he has just the most maximally uh, the most maximal familiarity with these texts, with the Vedic corpus, and all the details of them, so that he can make a very strong argument for the meaning of a certain word because of the breadth of his thorough knowledge of the texts themselves on a fine level, and all the stories, all of the context of the usages of the words. Whereas he will critique some of his opponents in the meaning about the meaning of Brahman, um, saying that sometimes lexicographers who are more focused on the language itself, they'll have a slant where they won't be as fully knowledgeable of the entirety of the textual corpus, like someone who focuses on it like he does, and to the extent that he does. So he will critique um, some of the ways the meaning has been weighted toward a certain interpretation by lexicographers due to what he sees as a sort of deficit of the perspective that they bring to it. Okay, so that is important preliminary framing, um, and you'll see what I mean as we go. So just to reiterate, though, he is one of the most productive scholars in the history of Indology. He really, is extremely respected, extremely cited in the field. Um, Published roughly 70 books, countless scholarly articles. He's a Dutch Indologist, and basically, Dutch Indology after him is everything is kind of named for him. He's sort of founded. Well, I wouldn't say founded, but he made Dutch Indology a much bigger thing, very much more respected, and a powerful force in Indology as well. So let's look at what I have here, which is I'm going to go into the key parts of his argument from his article, Notes on Brahman. It's a long article. It's more it's it is what it's just a very very extensive article focusing on this particular word Brahman and what its etymology may have been, the arguments about that, and what he thinks the totality of the evidence points to its original early Vedic Sanskrit meaning was, and how that explains all the different sort of meanings and that are connected to Brahman, and also different forms of the root word that appear connected. Okay, let's switch over to that tab. All right, so here we have the basic etymology from Monier Williams for Brahman, is going back to the root BRI, or actually, sorry, okay, this is the Celtic stuff. I'm going to table that for now. That's actually the Celtic dictionary, not the Sanskrit. So, okay, I'm going to begin with just the bare argument about what Gonda presents, and then after that, I'm going to hopefully, if I have time, dig into the etymological details so that can be presented in one place for people to refer to who are interested in this. All right, so these are kind of just the key pages from the article Notes on Brahman, and I'm going to read through some of these. Let us now consider the meaning of the adjective brihat, which has been given by Boethling and Roth as dicht, brecht, massenhaft, gross, einglicht, etc., etc. Okay, these are, okay, and as lofty, high, tall, great, large, wide, vast, abundant, compact, solid, massy, strong, mighty, extended, etc. by Monier Williams, as high, tall, great, much, abundant, important, mighty, grown up, old, clear, loud by Capellet, and as grand, vaste, abondant, puissant by Stubach. These So many complicated names. Niti A. Renu, Monier Williams, and Capellaire are not alone in the opinion that lofty high must be given in the first place. MacDonald, Geldner, and other scholars agree with them. Yet this view is, in my opinion, erroneous. Okay, so this is the thesis of his argument throughout the article, is that these extremely eminent scholars, MacDonald and Monier Williams, you can't get much more eminent than these, and also Geldner and these other names are very massive names in the field. But he disagrees that this common attribution of high or tall, basically, is the foundational meaning of the root word, okay, of brihat, or rather as the adjectival form, brihat. So, so yeah, that's his thesis, is that the first definition should not be high per se, that there's a more fundamental thing that yields a more fundamental meaning of the root that yields these meanings of high and other connected words like that. And so he kind of wants to argue against high and put this other meaning there in the first place. Okay. In this connection, it is noteworthy that Sayana, in commenting upon the Rig Veda, in which the adjective occurs some 285 times, never resorts to such words as unata, ukshrita, tunga, etc., 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 meaning high, to paraphrase this brihat. He never resorts to this. So Sayana, of course, is a medieval Indian commentator, the most famous name kind of that you can reach to in that period. All right, so this is within the Indian tradition. The eminent commentators are not reaching for high to mainly explain this word. The words he uses to explain the adjective are first and foremost mahat, over 180 times, meaning big, great, large, extensive, ample, considerable, etc. Then also prabhuta, over 30 times, abundant, considerable, great, numerous, much. Parivridha, 11 times, firm, solid, strong, etc. See further on, praudha, 10 times, large, grown up, strong, mighty, dense. Okay, so you can see already that the Sayana is favoring meanings that refer to mahat, greatness of some kind, including strength, mightiness, solidity, and that sort of thing. Okay. Without agreeing with this commentator in every particular case, we must admit that these synonyms fairly harmonize with the meanings expressed by the root brih, as in brim, ha, yati, etc. However difficult a problem it is to ascertain how far native commentators are reliable, it's always unknown, it is clear that they did not fall into a category of errors which have often clung to the researches of Western writers, viz., the proneness to rely upon outside information, such as etymological combinations of Indo-European linguistics. The other words, and so I think what he's referring to partially there is a tendency to compare certain similar words in Avestan material, which have led to to what seems like a picture supporting the high meaning. Okay, and he might reference what that Avestan or other Indo-European words or also Germanic words like berg, meaning referring to what appear to be this or that, mountain, a word for mountain, or there's another theory that Brahman, that brih comes from a deeper Indo-European root, connecting to song or something like that, which is another using Germanic material to support that, which hasn't been a very strong full picture of that, hasn't fully been accepted or has even been rejected. But that's another example of this tendency to grab these sort of Indo-European parallels to seem to build a picture, but it could be an error because it's sort of looking at these various outcomes of the deeper root that could go in these other directions, but they may be the secondary meanings, right? Of like high. The secondary meaning of high could pop up in a Vestan word. Secondary meaning could also appear in versions of this root in Sanskrit, and then an etymologist, a scholar, could come along and put those together and think that's the original meaning going back to a deeper root, but it could be, again, an error if you don't have a fuller picture of all the meanings as he's trying to present. Okay. The other words and phrases used by Sayana to explain Brihat are Ati Mahat, Ati Praudha, Ati Prabhuta, Atyanta, 5 times, meaning beyond the proper limit, very great, excessive, very strong, Atyadika, excessively abundant, Pravridha, fully developed, intense, great, strong, Ati Pravridha, Balavat, strong, powerful, intense, immense, unlimited, omnipresent, all-pervading. Okay, and some derivatives of Brih, such as Brimhana, I think, however that is, meaning making big, strengthening, Brimhata, strengthened. Finally, he resorts to a small number of other paraphrases, part of which will be mentioned in the following pages. Okay, so he's still, of course, referring to Sayana there. The most obvious conclusion is that Monier Williams, etc., these are the Western scholars, in considering high the first meaning of Brihat, were guided by the meaning of the Indo-European word family with which etymologists are accustomed to connect the Indian adjective. Armenian, I think, barger, high. So this is what I was referring to with some nearby cognates that mean high, but these may be secondary developments from similar words within the family. So Armenian barger, high, whatever. Unfortunately, this essay only exists online, as far as I know, in this sort of a poor version. So every word is a little bit hard to read. So just bear with me. So I think Burge, height, and then I think this is Middle Irish actually. Bree, mountain, which that is a word in the Middle Irish. Whatever this is, Kimre, etc. Bre, that's probably, yeah. Anyway, Bre, mountain, hill. Bre, high, Old High German, etc. Berg, mountain. Hittite, parkus, high, etc. The etymology, this etymology, to which we shall have to return later on, shows, however, once more that etymologists often dispatch semantic matters rather lightly. Okay, this is his dig at what they were doing with this. It would indeed appear to me that after a close investigation of the oldest texts, there will be hardly any reason to consider high the first meaning of Brihat. It must first and foremost be remembered that in the Rig Veda, Brahman repeatedly appears as a Vardhanam, i.e., as something that causes to increase. So that's how it appears in the Rig Veda itself. Something that causes to increase. So he's basically saying, let's look at the Rig Veda itself, the oldest text, and then also let's look at the oldest other Vedas and Brahmanas and things like that, and build the picture from the actual usages and a wide range of them as much as possible. So something that causes to increase, that grants prosperity, that strengthens, animates. In 2:12:14, this phrase appears with of Brahma Vardhanam, okay? Whom the Brahman, i.e. sacred word, whom Soma, whom this gift strengthens. So it's something that strengthens. And then let's see, whatever that word is, parvidham, stotram, etc., etc. So Sayana repeatedly uses this connected word parvridha, something like that, to explain Brahman. So he uses that word as this has the same meaning as Brahman, essentially, according to him. Vardhanani, Brahma, Stoman, etc. And elsewhere, it is not possible exactly to render the sense of the original in an English translation. Okay, And here is another case where this strengthening Brahman, the B here just means Brahman. He's using it as shorthand for Brahman. So this particular quote means this strengthening Brahman fills a god. So in this very text, Brahman is a strengthening thing that fills a god. For as waves fill a piece of water, so the Brahman, which causes you to increase, fill you, O Indra. Okay. And this other verse also expresses the idea that the god increases by the Brahman in the same manner as a piece of water by the streams. It is interesting to see that 1.93.6, Agni and Soma are augmented, increased, strengthened by Brahman, which apparently stands for vital force, or something in which a power that causes to swell, to increase, etc. inheres. Sayana paraphrases this quotation as the words of praise and the recitations are explicitly mentioned. Brahman may express another or more general, etc. Okay, that part was not as important. I cut that off. And then in this other section, he says, the Shatapatha Brahmana 3.9.1.11 explicitly states that one can become strong by means of Brahman. The same text, 5.1.4.11, describes the winning of Vaja, vigor, speed, energy, in the horses by means of Brahman and with Brihaspati's cooperation. And 1.2.1.7, it calls Brahman like Kshatram a Viryam, power or energy. So it calls Brahman a power or energy. Brahman is that by which the gods became immortal, 11.2.3.6. There are, however, texts in which Brahman, in some way or other, appears as an underlying or fundamental power. Okay, so this concept of this recurring concept, I think, of power is very important to the overall argument, as he is gradually arguing in the direction of Brahman originally meaning something more like power, or at least a certain type of power, or something connected to power, strength, etc. So Atharva Veda, quotation there. Charpentier seems to be right in identifying Tat, by which the plants breathe, which is not on earth or sky, and Brahma. Okay. The adjective points to undecaying firmness. Elsewhere, Brahman is a connecting potency. Taittiriya Samhita 1.5.4.3, by means of Brahman, the sacrifice which has been cut up by removing Agni from his place is put or bound together. Samdahati. Brahman is also the wood, the matter out of which heaven and earth are constructed in Taittiriya Brahmana. Okay, and this is another tangent, but one of the sons of Breoghan, the Gaelic equivalent of Brahman, is Fuat, and this appears to mean wood. So that is something that always kind of struck me, that possibly it's connecting to this role, this symbolic role or quality of Breoghan as being or yielding the wood of the cosmos in some sense. Okay. I now draw special attention to the fact that in all periods of Indian literature, Brahman is frequently called imperishable, immovable, firm, that it is regarded as a sustaining principle, as a basis, support, or firm and ultimate ground of existence. At all events, the words Brahmana Salam Nirmitam, the house built by means of Brahman, show that Brahman could be regarded as a power conducive to founding a house well. And of course, the cosmos is the great house that it founds. And then, of course, it appears in as symbolically, its symbolic representative is the Skamba, or the Devo Skamba, the Skamba of heaven, meaning prop, support, fulcrum, pillar. So that those meanings obviously are connected intimately with what Brahman is. Okay, the fulcrum or frame of the universe. Okay. All right, so the personal and the neutral idea of the highest reality are entirely intermingled in his opinion. So there's seemingly a personal and neutral or abstracted, what do you call it? Impersonal. A personal and the impersonal are sort of both intermingled, both represented. They had flexibility, it seems, in how they envisioned the Brahman as either personal or impersonal. And as I went into in my Trevulniv stream, especially, this seems to be the case with the Gaels as well. Okay, because Trevulniv has all the features of the personified Brahman in very specific ways, which seems like it must have carried through in a personified form, along with a more abstract or impersonal form. So, referring to the fact that in some Rigvedic hymns the supreme is indifferently called he or it, Radha Krishnan rightly remarks that the same formless, impersonal, pure, and passionless being of philosophy is worshipped by the warm, full-blooded heart of the emotional man as a tender and benevolent deity. To meet the demands of both popular religion and philosophy, the absolute spirit is indiscriminately called he or it. So, indiscriminately, they just did it. They didn't care much about the distinction or difference. That they could do both. They had flexibility in that. And not only Trevulniv represents the personal, but Breoghan does, at least in his myth. It's just a question of whether, in Breoghan's case, it's unclear how much of that is due to euhemerization and just the mythologization, or the later form of it. Whereas in the case of Trevulniv, there's much more evidence that this is, it's hard to explain it as just euhemerization. So much of his description is purely pertaining to personified traits, which match to the personified traits of the Brahman in Atharvaveda 10.8, where he's the explicitly personified version of the Brahman in Atharvaveda 10.8. And those all seem to have carried through in Trevulniv. So that's why I say both seem to be pertinent to the Gaels as well, and to have carried through in a consistent pattern. And also, if Tat is another name of Breoghan, as I think is likely, it essentially means, according to my interpretation, essentially means papa or dad. That's a very intimate deity name, and that would imply also this, that he probably don't call the impersonal face of the Brahman papa or dad. It's probably connecting to the personified, as they say, the tender and benevolent deity, as it says here. Okay, and I think that's consistent with, we see other deities with this sort of papa or dad naming conventions, not necessarily the absolute itself, but there is papayos. There are several actually. Even Attis is equated with Papa Zeus, and all sorts of things. I believe Brahma is referred to as, I think the form of the word might be Tata in Sanskrit. Tata, it's the exact same root word as Tat, I believe, in Gaelic, implying dear father, dear dad, dear papa, essentially. Okay, all right. So those are evidences that this is relevant to the Gaels, probably, as there is no sufficient reason to assume that in an anterior dynamistic period, the belief in an impersonal Brahman neuter has existed to the exclusion of the belief in a personal aspect of the same. What is this? Daseinsmacht? Like, I mean, Dasein, the famous word, I think, used by Heidegger for, well, beingness, or something like that. And then Macht, power. So that's sort of how he's defining it in this sentence, or divine power rather, in a following animistic period. So he's of course saying there's no sufficient reason to think that in an earlier period that we can't see, that we can't have any evidence for, there was only impersonal. There's no evidence that there was only impersonal and then the personal developed over time, because we have only the earliest evidence that we have. And so since there's no evidence for that, the Pati gods, such as Brihaspati, look like they are a way to formulate some of the aspects or divine powers related to the Brahman. Okay, that's kind of what he's saying here. All right. It goes without saying that the above remarks do not impair the plausibility of the etymology of Old High German Berg and Middle Irish Brie, etc. Also the Avestan group. Indo-European BHER, let's see, BHR, GH, superscript 1H, etc. So basically he's saying this doesn't impair the fact that Berg and other words are related to high or related to highness. It doesn't impair that. It just shows that that's a secondary meaning developing from the concept of something more like exaltedness. And exaltedness is an expression of this fundamental power, potency. So the potency and sublime exaltedness is the more fundamental meaning. That then secondarily develops the meaning of highness. Okay, so that's kind of what he's getting at here. So one only might suggest that the idea at the root of such proper nouns as Bridget, Germanic, Latin, Burgundiones, etc., was firm, sublime, important. Okay, so that's the fundamental thing that he believes is there, rather than high in the literal sense of an extending upwards, having great altitude, tall. So he thinks that's too reductive, too stripped down in what its fundamental meaning was. That yes, the height comes out of that, but the fundamental meaning should have been more connected to the fundamental meaning that we see, which is firm, sublime, important. So likewise, this word here was enhancing prosperity rather than, okay, you can read that for yourself if you're able on this text. If the etymology of the Latin fortis, right, defended by Brugman, etc., from BHERG superscript 1H, rather some idea like to be or make firm, to support, to be strong or strengthen, then by an inherent power, etc. So if that etymology is correct, this word and the ancient form forctus, which then would be identical with Sanskrit vridha, are connected with the above terms. Okay, so he's saying if this previously established or argued for etymology of fortis, connecting it with that which makes firm and strengthens, if that is true, as scholars have argued and shown, then fortis is a good cognate of these Brahman roots, or these Bri roots in Sanskrit, and that is a supporting evidence that we should look at the Latin fortis as a good example of the core meaning really carrying through and being a supporting case for his argument in the Sanskrit. The semantic development of fortis is worth mentioning. Used of physical strength and robustness, it could also express such ideas as firmus validus, okay, bonus. Okay, you can try to read those words. The quality is difficult to read there, but anyways, robusta, you can tell, bonus, good, robusta, robust, and validus sounds like valid. I'm not sure exactly the connotation of that, but and then applied to wood, trees, the wind, etc. Durable, strong, high wind, and also of moral strength, brave, valiant. In later Latin, we also find such meanings as long and big. Okay, you can see how the long and big kind of develop as a reduced sense, referring more to just the physical extension of that quality. Okay. It is to be noted in general that words for strong, firm, robust, etc., usually have a much wider range, being not only used of physical strength, etc., but also of moral strength of mind, feelings, etc., and of inanimate objects. There is, moreover, no hard and fast line between strong and powerful, mighty, etc., which are applied to strength with more emphasis on the active quality. Okay, so this, of course, this was just actually an interesting aside that Vastoshpati um, is treated. Let's see. He says that the Vastoshpati rite, his offering rather, is similar to the well-known feeding of Brahmins at rites, and the Bali, the offering for Brahma to be presented together with an offering for Vastoshpati. He's finding that interesting because Vastoshpati is called a firm pillar, stuna, okay, in the Rig Veda. So because Vastoshpati is called a firm pillar, just like the Skamba, he's saying that's interesting that he's offered to in similar ways to the human representatives of the Brahman, that is the Brahmin priests, and also Brahma himself. So he's wondering if, Vastoshpati being the pillar in this Rig Veda, if that supports, anyways, if that pillar imagery then is reinforcing through his connection to Brahma and the Brahmans, something to think about. Also, the fact that Vastoshpati guards the house, and the house was that image of the cosmos as well. Okay, some things to think about. Where the gods fashioned him, along with Brahman, he is spoken of as the observer of ordinances, and also connected to Agni, who is also connected or equated with Brahman. Okay. All right. So that's the basic argument. But he goes on with some more specific connections and critiques using his wide array of evidence from the Indian texts. So here we go. After a remark from Bop, Roth was the first Western scholar to connect Brahman with the root BRH. Okay, so this is all about what is the root of Brahman? Well, this BRH was proposed by these scholars, and it has become the standard etymology. So I want to really put that forward. When Celtic Source asked me about the etymology of Breoghan and Brahman, he made it sound like the etymology of Brahman was disputed and unknown. And the fact of the matter is, every etymology, essentially in this type of etymology, is going to be debated. And there are going to be alternate explanations and theories. So, but it's a bit of, it would not be accurate to say that there isn't a standard etymology that's accepted by most, and there is for Brahman, and it is this BRH, Brih, and there's also a standard agreed upon Proto-Indo-European, form of this root, or predecessor of this root, right? So to explain this root a bit more and how that connects, he's going to present some of the information here, and that I find that very helpful to get across to people who are wondering what is the root of Brahman, and then what is that? What is the meaning? How does that connect to the meaning that we're talking about, right? So the root BRH, and also bar, causative. There is feist, machen, kraftigen, starken. Okay, and those loosely translate to fatten, empower, strengthen. Okay, so to make fat, to make increase, to cause to fatten, of course, has to do with increasing width of something, to empower, to strengthen, to cause, to give power, to give strength. Okay, Pot, following him, expressed himself like this. BRH means gross, machen, kraftigen. Okay, using some of these same words, machen and kraftigen, and gross, I guess, is something like fat also, right? Okay, you can read that for yourself if you read German. Whereas it does not clearly appear that all later scholars who concurred in this etymology with Roth have completely subscribed to every detail of his reasonings, they did not enter into the merits of the etymology. Okay, so he's saying, I am going to explain the merits of this etymology. So not everyone, okay, he's basically saying not everyone who agreed with this, which is plenty of scholars agreed with this etymology, or at least accepted it, but they didn't go deeply into its merits, and so Gonda himself is going to provide that service. So Jan Gonda then explains the merits. And yes, this is just the name of the essay that I'm reading from, Notes on Brahman, and it is available online. I highly recommend reading the entire thing, but these are the key portions. So, yet Indian thinkers and authors have always argued that Brahman must be etymologically connected with the root brh, brih, and brimhati. Okay, so that is connected to the sections we were looking at before, where he was citing Sayana, and that Sayana is a representative of the Indian tradition itself, a good representative of how that had been traditionally etymologized. And he's just reiterating that this has always been the consistent voice of the Indian tradition, that the Indian tradition say, this comes from BRH. Okay, so Western scholars who have criticized or doubted that are going against that tradition, which is fine. It's good to be critical and present alternate opinions. But Gonda is explaining there are very strong merits to why this is the case, linguistically and specifically. So according to Shankara, the word Brahman is derived from brihati, to exceed, in commenting upon, okay, that's just one line there. Okay, quote, Brahman is essentially eternal, pure, intelligent, free, omniscient, omnipotent. For if we trace back the word Brahman to its root, we instantly recognize that the meanings eternity, purity, and so on belong to it, because these meanings follow from the meaning of the root brh. Eternity, purity, and so on follow from the deeper meaning of brh. And elsewhere in his commentary upon Taittiriya Upanishad 2.1, the same authority states that Brahman derives its name from its being brihat, to the highest degree. Okay, that means they're directly connecting Brahman with this root, brihat. And so that's just a reiteration of the connection between Brahman and brihat, or brih. That the highest is the unsurpassed, and that the very unsurpassable is Brahman, is the highest, brihatama. And then tvat, something which is to an unlimited degree and in a superior manner, brihat, and which is a brahmana, because this is the meaning of the root brih. Okay, these are citations from the tradition itself, different authorities, which again you can read in the essay I'm reading from, some more context around these quotations I'm reading from. But basically they're saying something that is very brihat is a brahmana, and that is the meaning of brih. It's connecting all these concepts together into one thing in their tradition. One moment, please. Okay, that this etymology is approved of to this day may appear from this last quotation. Quote, Brahma is that by which the worship of God is expanded or elaborated, from Brimhata. Unquote. As ancient India did not draw a hard and fast line between concreta, for example, a mountain, and abstracta, like a force, it is not to be wondered at that brihat also applies to such concepts as vayas, meaning vigor or strength, and compare here the Irish brig and brigos, meaning strength or strong. So this is where the meaning of strength, powerfulness, is what carries through, I argue, and yeah, we can see in words specifically like brigos and brig, carries through this meaning of strength, strong, mighty, powerful, etc., showing that likelihood that it really is from this same shared root. Okay, so this citation, meaning firm, tough, stout. Okay, Vyas is in the possession of the Maruts. It's asked for them, and it can also be qualified by Uttama, abundant, brilliant, etc. Power of mind, it is related to in a similar way. Power of mind. I do not object to intrinsically powerful as the meaning here, and the shades of meaning expressed by Sayana's synonyms. So he is assenting to defining this, glossing this meaning as intrinsically powerful in this particular case of the form of this word, right, that he's talking about. Okay. There are numerous passages in which the adjective brihat, to which we have, on the strength of the text, discussed, ascribe such meanings as firm, great, powerful, extensive, and often being firm, etc., enough to be able to stand firm or to support. Of course, Trevolnyv, his very name, coming from Fulach, Trevolnyv comes from Fulach, and that means to support or bear. He is the supporter or bearer, just like the pillar. Okay. And sometimes also being so in a somewhat unusual, amazing, or supernormal way is associated in some way or other with the term Brahman. See Rigveda 5.85.1, Brihat. As to the meaning of Brihat, in later texts, it may be noted that it is not only the opposite of Suksma, fine, small, feeble. It is the opposite of fine, small, feeble. It also qualifies the rope of Manu's ship as strong, solid, and the ark itself spacious, broad, extensive. In medical texts, brihat means vital place, and brahmana, making strong, also fat, nourishing. Okay, it is important to remember that the adjective, whatever this is, however we can try to read that, divit barhas, to be found in the Rig Veda, applies to Agni, Indra, Rudra, Soma, Usha, doubly firm. So yeah, probably something like dvi, barhas, doubly firm, strong, etc. And therefore perfectly tallies with its etymological cognate brihat. See especially Rig Veda 8.15.2. The adjective barhista is the superlative of brihat in Rig Veda 3.13.1. From these words, it appears that the etymological connection with brihat was explained by its being uninterrupted or infinite, and that with brimhana by its being the cause by which the Vedas and all things are developed. So it's a developing cause or a developing power. So the power of development is sort of power of growth. Sometimes these are the ways this root or even Brahman are explained, etymologized in this context. All right, so that is Ganda. Those are, I think that's just fascinating to see some of the evidence he brings to this, and the way he's criticizing some lexicographers and things as having put the emphasis in the wrong place, right? Due to their certain perspective that they're taking, and as I said, the root word of Breoghan, the Gaelic equivalent, appears to mean his name and everything around this word in Gaelic, Old Irish. It has the connotation of strong or strength. So that, first of all, if you accept that mythologically that he is equivalent, it supports the etymology that Ganda is putting forward, as if they go back to a Proto-Indo-European shared meaning and concept and word. And And the reverse can kind of be the same as well, that if this means strong or to make strong in Sanskrit, that reinforces, that supports the fact that Breoghan, whose name has that meaning, and his alternate name Brigus very clearly means strong. It supports the fact that Breoghan's name indeed comes from this deeper shared root at the Proto-Indo-European level. Okay, so these are then examples of other etymologists, other scholars, major scholars who have given, written the dictionaries on this word essentially, and given their readings of, first of all, what is the root of Brahman. That's kind of the number one thing. These next things will reinforce the fact that Brahman scholars, the standard accepted etymology of Brahman is this BRH Sanskrit root. Okay, and that is reinforced by these numerous different dictionaries and scholars. And then secondly, you can get an idea of the different meanings that are being ascribed by other scholars. And as we just went through, there are several scholars who emphasize the high meaning more, but not all of them do that as well. But we'll kind of see that back and forth. But the key thing here is reinforcing that Bri, or BRH or BRIH, which is just another form of the same root, that this is the root of Brahman. Okay, so this is, I believe, from the scholar Whitney. He says BRH, this is the root BRH, to make big or strong. And then down here, if you look in the derived words, of course, Brahman, the different forms, Brahman and Brahman down here. So this is Whitney saying Brahman comes from Bri, and he says it means to make big or strong. That is right in line with what Gonda was just saying. Make big or strong, very much could fall in line and be similar to what Gonda was just arguing. This next one is from Monier Williams. Now, Monier Williams, of course, was one of the cases that one of the scholars, of course, that Gonda was somewhat arguing against, of the priority of the meanings. But nonetheless, of course, Monier Williams is like maybe the biggest Western name in this field, sort of, wrote the dictionary of Sanskrit that whenever that was, 100 years ago or whatever, and is still used dictionary, and a very famous name. Okay, so it's important to see what Monier Williams says, and also to see how Gonda is critiquing him slightly in the emphasis, but they're both agreeing on the root word, which is right here. He says from BRIH, that's just a form of the same word, root BRH. He says Brahman means literally growth, expansion, evolution, development, swelling of the spirit or soul. And that's interesting because, Gonda didn't like how Monier Williams emphasized height too much or something. But when you look at Monier Williams' actual definition in his dictionary, it's only slightly, maybe it's like slightly too vague for Gonda, I guess. But it's really not, it doesn't say high right there, right? For Gonda, for Brahman at least. Okay, but I guess maybe he's concerned more about the root itself or something. But in any case, Monier Williams is very close also to the meaning that Gonda is bringing through in terms of growth. Growth implies, the growth power, the power that causes growth and that causes expansion, evolution, development. Okay, you can see the colorations and emphasis are slightly different between Monier Williams and Gonda, but they're hovering around a similar circle and kind of giving this idea that, this power of expansion, growth, etc., is something that has to be dealt with in terms of what the meaning is, and they agree on also the specific root word. Of course, this then connects to pious effusion or utterance. So the utterance, the sort of sacred word, liturgical word, sacred formulation, these all become meanings of the word Brahman in the Rig Veda. And we see that connected meaning of this sort of sacred word or some such like that. We see that even in the Irish case, where we have Breoghan, and the related word is bricht or brecht. And bricht or brecht means like a magical incantation. So it's a sacred word from the same shared root with brig or Breoghan. And so you see this family of meanings, this family of words, this pattern seems to have carried through into the Irish equivalent thing, where the root word means, this growth power, what have you. And then one of the offshoot meanings is an utterance that contains this power in some sense, a sacred word of power, right? And of course, an alternate version of Breochan's name is Brechthan, Breachdan, Brech, and the sacred word version, or rather the magical incantation word, again, is Bricht or Brecht. So Bricht or Brecht versus Brechthan. You can see the words, the connection there a bit clearer in that version of Breochan and his name. Okay. The sacred syllable Om, religious or spiritual knowledge, etc. All right. The Veda, the sacred word, as opposed to Vach, the word of man. That's interesting because, of course, Vach has sacred aspects as well, but that's interesting. The Veda, a sacred text, a text or mantra used as a spell. So, not only sacred word in the Vedic meaning, but literally a spell, a mantra used as a spell. Okay, that's very specific. That's what Bricht or Brecht means in the Irish, coming from the same root word, as I say. And this reinforces that these come from the same root word. So this is why when you look at all the evidence, it becomes, I don't want to overuse the word ridiculous, but for emphasis, I will say, it becomes a bit ridiculous when the word means a spell, sacred word in Sanskrit, and it means bricht, it means sacred word, sacred incantation, rather essentially a spell in the Irish version. It becomes hard to deny. I'll just put it that way, that these a counter argument against them not coming from the same root word has to be much stronger. Okay, it should be the standard, and it is the standard kind of that these do trace to an original shared root. Okay. All right, and so this is from Uhlenbeck, the scholar Uhlenbeck. He says Brahma, meaning a spell, prayer, etc. So that's the sacred word form of the word. And then also Brahma, magic priest, Brahmin, high priest, the god Brahman. These are related to BRH in Brihaspati's. So this is just another scholar reinforcing that scholars at large, the standard etymology for Brahman is BRH. He is reinforcing that here. Brahman related to the root BRH. Then he says, one compares either Latin flamen, priest, or Irish. And I think there was an Irish word there that may have been lost. Casts spell, magic spell. That's the word bricht. And then also brager, meaning poetry, art. Brage, god of poetry, and other words with Indo-European. Okay. We can then see an etymological dictionary of Persian, English, and other Indo-European languages by Dr. Ali Nurai. So even the Persian scholars, and this is these I think all of these are cited on Wiktionary, or they are just other standard dictionaries references in the field. But you can kind of look at the Wiktionary for Brahman, and these are kind of ones that that are being referred to. He says, of course, Sanskrit Brahman, religious devotion or prayer, and it is under the heading of the root Bhergh, the same ultimate root word in the, I think he's tracing that back all the way to the Indo-European, perhaps. And you can see that he is using the meaning of high, but with no explanation, no argument. He's just kind of using the Germanic parallel, meaning high, hill fort, etc., to take that position that the root, the Indo-European root, should mean high. And that's explicitly what Gonda is saying. That's a superficial interpretation, that high should not be the number one meaning, even though just because Germanic and some other words that come from this mean hill or high, the fundamental meaning is that is something sublime, exalted, expanse from a fundamental power. Okay, so you can see what's happening there, basically. But he reinforces, this scholar also reinforces the fact that it is the standard etymology of Brahman, that it comes from BRH, which comes, in this case, he's pointing all the way back to Indo-European BHERGH. This is from Brahman, A Comparative Theology, Michael W. Myers. So just another scholar in the field writing on Brahman in comparative religion. And he says the term Brahman is derived from, so he just says it is derived because this is the accepted standard etymology in the field today. Brahman is derived from the Sanskrit root BRH or BRNH, third person singular present brinhati, to grow or increase. Brahman represents the power of the cosmos, essentially. He says, okay, so to grow or increase, you can see it's a simplified version of what Whitney was also arguing. Okay, and this is the Wiktionary itself, where sometimes Wiktionary is questionable, but it is a good reference, oftentimes, to see sort of the consensus. And what Wiktionary has for Brahman is from Proto-Indo-Aryan, B superscript H, R A Z superscript H hyphen MA, and that's from Proto-Indo-Iranian, Brahma, from a Schwebe Ablaut form of Proto-Indo-European, BH, B superscript H, ER, G superscript H, Berg, or however that's pronounced, Berg, you know, I think, I'm not sure if that G is hard, it has that accent on there, right? Berg. But in any case, to become high, rise, elevate, plus MN with the dot below, literally growth, expansion, creation, development, swelling of the spirit or soul, cognate with Latin fortis, just as Gonda pointed out. The Sanskrit root is BRH, to increase, plus man from the same Proto-Indo-European root above. And then alternately, so this is why some people will say, well, the etymology of Brahman is unknown or contested. Well, like I said, most of these old roots are debated over. But this, you can see from what I presented, there's a firm consensus, there's a firm standard etymology that it is from BRH, the Sanskrit root, but there's an alternative which has, you can look at, of course, that doesn't subtract from the fact that there is a standard etymology. So the alternate etymology is from Meyerhofer. He prefers to derive the word from Proto-Indo-European BHREGH, as you see, connecting this, supporting this from the Old Norse word bragur, meaning poetry, whence Icelandic bragur, poem, character. And essentially, Meyerhofer questions the Schwebe Ablaut sort of process happening to explain this. It's like sort of a complicated change that has to be assumed to have happened between the root and Brahman itself, which the standard etymology accepts, but Meyerhofer wants to sort of question that and instead use Brogger poetry as the sort of the strong evidence for a pattern. But I would just say, like, this is another example of what Gonda is arguing against, which is taking these sort of stray pieces from Indo-European parallels, such as, oh, look, Brogger means poetry. Therefore, maybe we can connect that back to this other root, BHERGH, which can be loosely connected to poetry and reconstruct it's more scattered. It is more scattershot with less evidence for it than what the standard etymology is. And that's why the standard etymology is the standard etymology. In this case, there's just more to show, to reinforce that this was the meaning. And the alternative is firmly alternative. It has less evidence for it. This is from, I'm not sure which scholar. I pulled this picture from another one there on Wiktionary that I pulled a screenshot from. But I wanted to just include this about Flamen because it demonstrates that also this other alternate etymology sometimes proposed, which I even think M.L. West brings up as a possibility. But this scholar points out that it's an old connection between Flamen and Brahman, and of course Dumézil himself. Dumézil writes a whole thing about how Flamen and Brahman are sharing these similarities and may be connected. But linguistically, it has been deeply questioned whether that is a real linguistic connection. So the old connection of Flamen with Sanskrit Brahman is highly problematic and has been dismissed by Shriver. As W.H. summarizes, the ending en points to an archaism, probably a noun sacrificial act, which changed its semantics to priest. For a similar shift, Bird Observer from Auger, see Augeo, the only viable comparanda are found in Germanic, but they show root, final, etc. Okay, I don't want to get in too much into the details of that. But the point is, this is Brahman, the priest, not the fundamental reality Brahman with a different accent. But the point is, those words are connected. And so it's just another alternate connected tangential sort of theory where this would derive Flamen and Brahman from something, but that is sort of been deeply doubted, connected, deeply questioned. So it's a bit of a tangent that can be investigated more if one wishes to. Okay, so this is Meyerhofer. Okay, this is Meyerhofer, but it's all in German, so I'm not going to go into it on the stream. You can, of course, read his argument here, which he goes into the Schwebe-Ablaut, what he thinks the Schwebe-Ablaut issue is. But I would argue that Gonda has more evidence. Gonda has more evidence, as does the consensus standard of the field. And you can see that from these various dictionaries that this is the most used and referred to etymology of Brahman. Okay. Unfortunately, that's in German, so I can't go too deep into that. All right. So let's switch over to my other tab. So this then brings us back to Breoghan. If we accept that at least the standard etymology of Brahman is from the word bri, right? You don't have to say everything is 100% scientifically, objectively proven, but you do have to accept that that is the standard etymology. And secondly, the evidence is strong if you look at it yourself, as we went through with all the way the word is actually used in the earliest texts and in a wide array of texts, what it's actually being used for. Gonda makes clear what that is, and it connects to that which makes vast or strong, sublime, some kind of sublime power, and all of that. And of course, well, yeah, I mean, you could see how much the word Macht was coming up with the word power. When we look at the word in the Irish, we have, so I'm going to, if I have time, I'll present why should we think that Breoghan, the word Breoghan, does indeed come from brig, this root, this Irish root brich rather. That is an argument on its own. Or secondly, is it a fossilized ancient word from even earlier than like Irish or Old Irish? Even is it a fossilized common Indo-European word or something like that, or Proto-Indo-European name that was sort of reshaped later? All these things are possibilities to think about. But first of all, we should look at what this root in question in Irish means and what the connected words are, right? So we can get an idea of what we're talking about. So, and the other question here is, right, this is the root in Old Irish. Brich is a root in Old Irish. The big question then is, does brich really come from the Proto-Indo-European BHERGH that we saw, right? BHERGH is the sort of standard derivation of Brahman and of the Sanskrit BRH. So is there evidence, is the strongest case to be made that brich in Irish comes from this same root? Okay. And of course that is bound up with the question of whether the German berg also comes from that root, because this is this hill word, right? This hill word in Europe. So it's pretty clear that berg in German does come from the same root. It's pretty well accepted. That's a separate thing. But then we have it in Irish, brich, meaning hill. Middle Irish, bri. Also appearing in Welsh, of course, bre. Cornish, bre. So the same bre. It can turn into sort of these e endings. Gaulish briga, brigantes. And this scholar, okay, this is the standard. What is this, Matasovic? This must be from Matasovic, but I'll have to double check what this dictionary is. This is just the Proto-Celtic and Irish standard dictionary that's out there right now. Okay. He says right here, okay, etymology, the Celtic forms can be derived from the zero grade of the PIE root B superscript H, ER, G superscript H. That is the root of Brahman that we went into. And the observed vowel alternations point to a Proto-Indo-European root noun, nominative, this. Celtic generalized the stem of the oblique cases. Hence the paradigm, Proto-Celtic, nominative, etc. Brig, you see right here, brig -s, and general brig os. Now, again, I have to repeat that brigos, this exact spelling, brigos, is the alternate name of the figure Breoghan. He's literally named Brigos, and that is in Geoffrey Keating's version, I believe, and I'll go into that if I get a chance. But instead of calling him Breoghan, he calls him Brigos. So we know according to the scholars, we don't know anything 100%, but we know that the name Brigos, the alternate name of Breoghan, based on these scholarly arguments and consensus, that name does come from the shared root with Brahman, as clearly as we can see. The root noun is preserved in Old Irish bri, while the British and Gaulish forms point to a derivative briga, okay? And then, of course, we have brigantino, chief, and see, and I guess that's, you know, a slightly different word there, but also see might, power. So that's the next one. Brigo itself just means might or power. Okay, this is key because I was pointing to, of course, brig means hill, but brigo or briga means might or power. It's this same dynamic that Gonda was picking at and going into in his argument, that these words for hill or high place and power, they're from the same root, but they are two usual common developments of this root. And the fundamental meaning, the deeper meaning that he sees is that it is connected to the power that is in this, that the root implies, and that power expresses itself in the exalted height of a hill or some such. So the hill represents that power in an extent, as something embodying the extension, growth power. Okay, so we have both of these root words. We have both of these forms of the root in Irish as well, meaning the same pattern, sort of. Okay, and you can see that case on Edil for yourself. Bri meaning hill, BRI with the accent on the I. Okay, so Great Hills. Let's see. Anything else interesting there? It's just a common word for hill. And then this is the Irish dictionary. This is just an older Irish dictionary, Irish English Dictionary by Dineen from 1904, explaining the root brig that we just looked at, right? So brig, the word brig and brie that we just looked at means hill specifically, but then there's brigo and briga, meaning power. And so this is going back to brig itself, sort of uniting those I think in a root here. So you can kind of look at how those are related. But in any case, Dineen explains that brig itself, also appearing as briog and brig, right? Plural as brioga. You can see the O coming in there sometimes, brioga. Briog, meaning, according to Dineen, it just means power, strength, vigor, force, virtue, efficacy, substance, essence, and also meaning. Okay. And give some examples there. The point being, of course, that yes, this root brik, it has very strongly carried through these meanings of power, strength, vigor, and virtue, exactly matching the meaning of bri, the root of the Sanskrit word of Brahman that Gonda goes into. Now, if the meanings are matching this exactly, and also the etymology works out and is supported by the scholars that we just looked at, going back to BHERGH in Proto-Indo-European, you have a strong picture that you would really need something strong to argue against this picture, because everything is just seeming quite clear, at least if you put all the pieces together at the same time, it builds a strong picture. Okay, and then you can see on Edil, once again, the form BRI with accent G, bri, simply means power, strength, force, authority, vigor, virtue, might, virtue, force, strength, energies, power of decision, something that is of account, like a virtue, something that has virtue, every power and substance. All right, so it's very clear. It's very clear that brig exists as this word in Old Irish. It can mean hill in the other form of it that we looked at, but brig in this, spelled this way, means power, strength, and that matches the Sanskrit argument by Gonda. Here are the other forms you can look at. Okay. You then have what I mentioned, which is Bricht, which also I think develops into maybe perhaps later it develops into a form that is Brecht. But regardless, in Old Irish, you have Bricht, B-R-I-C-H-T, coming from a Proto-Celtic Brichtu, meaning magical formula or incantation. And this dictionary, Matasovic, or whoever this is that I have here, the Proto-Celtic dictionary, he ties it to Sanskrit Brahman himself, connecting it to the meaning of priest, of course, which is a bit strange because there's, of course, the other version of Brahman, which just means a spell or magical formula or sacred formula in some sense. So it means the identical thing as well. Okay, the PIE root must be reconstructed without the laryngeal. Otherwise, we would expect this. Therefore, it is doubtful whether this is the same root as bright, B superscript ERHG. So that's just don't get mixed up by this word. It is not the one we were looking at. It's a slightly different one to the root of Brahman. So he's saying it cannot come from this alternate one. Okay, it cannot. So he's clearing the path, showing that it comes more so, from something else. But in any case, we may want to compare Proto-Celtic Brixtu with Bergstu, bright, beautiful, which also has to be from a root without a laryngeal. Okay. All right. So that the connection between those he leaves unclear, but he does compare to Brahman, which is interesting. Okay, I find that interesting. And he leaves it a bit vague, the connection of Bricht and Brie, and that's fine, I think. So we don't want to overstate the evidence that he brings on that issue. But next, I'm going to bring up another document here. If you give me just a minute and maybe take a pause. Okay, how does that look? Dude, how do I become like you? How do I just read so much research and not get bored? Gotta be. Thanks for the comment. And I don't know. You just gotta be a bit crazy. So just, do what you enjoy. That's what I say. And all right. But the thing is, okay, the interesting thing is, these resources are so incredibly available. That's what's amazing. If you kind of get to know where things are, you can Google right now, Yanganda Notes on Brahman, and read one article. It's like 70 or 100 pages. It's a pretty long article, but you can read that and understand this argument and why this is the best argument for what Brahman really means. And it goes in line with the Indian tradition itself. And it is supported by one of the best, greatest scholars, Western scholars of the 20th century. So you have it from both camps, that this is a strong argument, and it is what is supported by the comparative case. That is what I'm presenting now. Okay, so not only is Gonda's argument strong on its own, by its own merits of Indology and linguistics, but it's confirmed, I think, I think it's proven, I think it's supported by the Irish comparative mythology evidence and linguistic evidence that I'm showing, okay? And they mutually sort of reinforce each other to show this clear picture. So how does this connect to Breoghan's name is a more complicated question that I again, as a non-linguist, I'm not going to be able to present this in a beautiful, perfect form, especially on a stream. But I want to present this information. I just want to. I want to give these resources as leads and evidences that other people can look at and research for themselves. And so that's what this document here will go into some more. So the Brie etymology of Brahman, these are variations of the root here, is the standard etymology of Brahman and connects directly to the meanings of the related Irish words Breoghan, aka Breachtan, aka Brigus, and also Brieg and Brigid and Brigantia, these forms that we just looked at. There are these various forms, but they are variations on each other, and they have these meanings that are identical, essentially, to the Sanskrit ones that we went into. Beginning with Monier-Williams, the standard Sanskrit dictionary in the field, as we saw, Brahman, meaning literally growth, expansion, etc., comes from BRIH, and also can mean pious effusion or utterance. And this is also the Whitney one that I also already went into. Uhlenbeck. This is just reviewing all the ones that I already showed you guys. Okay, so eminent Indologist Jan Gonda spends much of his classic article, Notes on Brahman, explaining the merits of the etymology from BRH and how this connects to the early meanings of Brahman as strength and greatness. This early attested usage of Brahman as implying strength connects directly to Old Irish words like Brieg and Brigus, meaning strength/strong, and Brigus being an attested alternative, that is, an attested alternative name of Breoghan himself. I messed up the writing there. The Sanskrit root is cognate with Latin fortis, which still means strong, as we looked at, which is also from the same PIE root, thus showing the same semantic outcome in Latin. This etymology for Brahman from BRH is also the one most asserted throughout the Indian tradition, as Gonda highlights. Okay, so that can't be set aside casually. As a result of all this, Sanskrit BRH from PIE B superscript H ERG superscript H is the clear standard etymology of Brahman, with Meyerhofer's proposed derivation firmly an alternative etymology. Hence, Wiktionary and Wikipedia's entries saying this plainly, as we already went through. Okay, and the Flaman Brahman connection is also questioned or rejected. Okay, so this is again, a bit of a summarized argument for how Breoghan connects to this root. As I said already, Brigus is his alternate name in Keating, I believe. At least it may be someone who Keating is recounting their version of it or something like that. We'll go into that in a moment. Brigus, that is Brigus, that Keating mentions, that clearly, as we saw, comes from this Brieg word, meaning strong, and that very, very visibly, very arguably, comes from the same root as Brahman, as we saw. But Breoghan itself and Breachtan, these other main versions of his name, how do we linguistically get from Breoghan to Proto-Indo-European root, or at least to the Irish root, which then getting that back to the Proto-Indo-European root? That's a complex linguistic argument that, again, I'm not going to be able to make perfectly here, but here is a bunch of evidence and a few ways to look at it and to argue for that, to argue for what the rest of the evidence is pointing towards already, okay? So one possible path, again, these are possible paths. One possible path is that Brahman and Breoghan are two derivatives of the same Proto-Indo-European root, BHERGH, Brahman being an abstract noun and Breoghan being a participle. In Proto-Indo-European, the word ancestral to Breoghan would be BHRE, B superscript H, RE, G superscript H, ONTS. If there was a being, or a name rather, at that level. So that's part of the argument, is like, we see Trevolnyth carrying through the features of the Vedic Brahman. This implies to a comparative mythologist like myself that there probably was a single name at the Proto-Indo-European level. I'm not, you can't rule that out, at least. So within this possibility, the reconstructable version of the name would be something like this: BHREG superscript HONTS, meaning the Breg one, whatever the root Breg means, right? And we looked at the root Breg, and it seems to mean power or strength, in a sublime, exalted sense. Growth power, the growth power of the divine growth power of the cosmos, whatever, however you want to define what we saw with Gonda and coming through in Irish and Sanskrit, the Breg one. So this would have been a present participle with BHREGH being the same Schwebe Ablaut of BHERGH that Brahman is formed from. The feminine form of this, B superscript H REG superscript H ONTIH subscript 2, is the source of Brigantia and Brigid. So this Brigantia and Brigid, interestingly, there has been more kind of scholarly attention and argumentation for Brigid's connection to the shared root with the Sanskrit terms, because Ushas has the epithet of Brihat, meaning the high, the exalted, that we looked at. And so therefore, some scholars have connected Brigid's name to this Sanskrit root. And so there's been a bit more attention to saying, hey, there's like a connection of this root to this epithet of Ushas, because Ushas, the dawn goddess, might be similar to Brigid, right? So this is not new ground in that sense. So in that case, it is well established that Proto-Indo-European B superscript H ERG superscript H becomes Old Irish Bri, BRIGH, which becomes Brigid and Brigantia. And so, therefore, if that's the case, Breoghan could be a related formation from the same root that scholars have traced down to Brigid. Okay? That would be the simple way of putting that. That we can see, we can reconstruct the steps, basically. We can reconstruct how this would have looked, and we can see how the basic root transforms into Brigid and is related to, of course, epithet of Ushas in Sanskrit, but it becomes Brigid. And then we could say, okay, now we have semi-established that Brich, the root of Brigid, probably comes from BHERGH, and therefore Breoghan is a related formation of this same root, like Brich an, and that would mean that an, an in Breoghan, is just sort of like a suffix, such as could be the diminutive suffix. It could be a different suffix from a different level of the language. But that's one path. The other path is that Breoghan comes directly from the Old Irish root brich with the diminutive ending an. Okay, sorry, that is the second path, is the diminutive ending, by the established changes seen in the bleich / transforming into Bleochan, example given below, where IGH becomes Eochan. The broad vowel of the ending an triggers the lowering of I to E, and eventually the diphthongization to EO. Okay, so there are examples of the I, bleich, the bleich in I, or the I in bleich, being lowered to let's see, the lowering of I to E. So it's like I changes to E, and then that becomes diphthong EO over time. And yeah, this question of the relationship of these milk words that I'm pointing to, or these words bleich and bleochan, is a tangential question that I'm not going to go into too much. But there are examples we can pull from of this process happening in Irish. So in the scenario where Breoghan is a direct cognate of Brahman, that is to say, if Breoghan means the same thing essentially, and yeah, like I said, is comparative mythologically established as being in the same mythological role. And so we want to say that it's not just like a different formation, a different development that is a similar thing developing but different. If they're actually direct cognates, the N could actually be a fossilized part of the Proto-Indo-European participle ending. So picture it like this. There are no breaks in the generations, essentially, arguably. If there was a name at in the Proto-Indo-European times, which would have been the ancestor of Brahman, then this name, and if we argue that Breoghan could be a descendant of that same Proto-Indo-European name on the Proto-Indo-European level, then actually it seems unlikely that Breoghan was derived for the very first time during the Old Irish period from an existing root like Breag to arrive at like a new sacred name in the Old Irish period. You picture a name that holds this meaning, that has this role, this important role. It's very possible it's a fossil name that was carried through over the generations, one generation to the next, and was occasionally at times reshaped according to new speech patterns and even sometimes etymological understandings and things like that. Different things could kind of reshape things, but you're passing the ball down the generations, and kind of, it can get a little bit remolded at certain periods of time, but overall it has been a continuing passing down of a fossil name in this particular possibility. So if that's the case, deriving it directly from an Old Irish root is a bit strange. That Old Irish root is there and is related, but it's not like they created the name for the first time in the Old Irish period, is just kind of the point here. That's one possibility. So if that's the case, if that's the path we want to think about, then Breoghan would be like a fossilized inheritance from all the way back at the Proto-Indo-European level, perhaps, or at some point that we can't determine back there. And it's an ancient PIE name then. So then what looks like an Irish suffix, the AN, could actually be the phonetic descendant of that Proto-Indo-European participle ending. So as we said earlier, Brahman would be the abstract noun form, but Breoghan looks more like a participle. In Proto-Indo-European, there could have been something like this: Breogons, okay, and yeah, the ending in Breoghan, it's possible that it is the remnant of a fossil from farther back. Okay, that's kind of the point. It's complicated to think about, and of course speculative if that happened. But it's this possibility that you can't rule out either, and so you can't just assume a clean derivation at a later stage or something when you're dealing with sacred names. So Breoghan appears to be, in that case, a name carried through to Irish from at least Proto-Indo-European times, where it would have been something like this. And so what we are looking at in Breoghan could be a fossil reshaped over time, eventually then processed through the Old Irish sound changes that are evidenced in bleach becoming Breoghan. So we have this word, as I said, bleich, which gets diphthongized into Breoghan. And that pattern would remind us, would mimic what we see with brich or even brech, turning into Breoghan. Why do we have this diphthongized EO and the AN ending? Okay, there are these different ways to think about it. If one prefers to imagine the name Breoghan was recreated from the Old Irish root more directly, then the derivation from the Old Irish brig, and then the Breoghan sound change gives the template for this formation within Old Irish. So further evidence about connecting Breoghan himself to this brig root word. Breoghan's tower is located in Brigantia, which name uncontroversially is from BHERGH. I should rather say, is there is a lot of scholarly attention, and this is how it's treated in a standard way in comparative mythology. In comparative mythology, Bridget's name is derived from BHERGH. And actually, I can pull that up even on Wiktionary to give a better idea of that. Okay, so when I say it's uncontroversially derived from the same root as Brahman, you can see that on Wiktionary, that is the argument. And that's what I should, of course, rather say. The scholarly argument is that Brigantia comes from the same root, B superscript H, ERG superscript H, to rise up, ascend. And again, that's the debated meaning, but it is this same root word. Okay, back to other. And that is the root of Brahman. Thus, the Tower of Brigantia, that is Breoghan's tower, is already established as sharing the root with Brahman, so that the connection between the location of Breoghan and the root of Brahman is rather unquestioned. There's not really a strong scholarly argument out there against this position that I know about. However, that is not all. Old Irish, BRIGH, which comes from Proto-Indo-European, BHERGH, according to that Proto-Celtic dictionary that we went through, I think Matisovic, is also the etymology others before me have given for Breoghan, aka Brigus, BRIGH, Brich, which is from Proto-Indo-European, BHERGH, according to the Proto-Celtic dictionary, is also the first suggestion for the etymology of Breoghan himself by John O'Mahony in his translation of Keating. So what I'm saying here is John O'Mahony is this old, and I should actually look at what year he's from. John O'Mahony. Okay, so he's from the 1800s, I believe. It says he was born in 1815. If this is the same Irish scholar, of course there could be more than one John O'Mahony Irish scholar. But yeah, he is the translator of History of Ireland by Keating. Okay, so he's from the mid 1800s. So O'Mahony is translating Geoffrey Keating, History of Ireland, and John O'Mahony in his footnote says that Breoghan is from this same root word as we see here. He explains, the name Breoghan may be otherwise written Breoghan, Bregan, the long E being commutable with EO in the Irish language. So that says it pretty straightforwardly. He says that the E can be commuted, can be changed into the EO diphthong, and that is a standard thing in the Irish language. Thus we say fair and feor, i.e. grass, indiscriminately. So these two versions of the word for grass, one with the E and one with the EO. Breoghan, or Breoghan, as he has it, is derived either from brich, that is the root we're concerned with, B-R-I-G-H, meaning strength, or from breo, meaning fire, and not from brew, a dwelling, as some have supported, in guessing at the etymology of the name of the Brigantes. That is from his translation of Keating, page 174. So the point there is the very first etymology he brings up is that Breoghan comes from brich, meaning strength, and that it is just this standard commutation, changing the E to the EO. And there are other examples of that happening. He then suggests alternate etymologies, such as the one for fire, which I think are ruled out or strongly argued against by other evidence. Not just the mythological evidence, which argues against it, but there's other evidence we can look at that suggests that Brigh is the only possible etymology of Breoghan that explains all the data, and essentially the only etymology that explains all the variants of Breoghan's names that appear. And that may be why O'Mahony goes to such lengths to present that as the etymology and explain the diphthong of it. So O'Mahony also says that Clona Breoghan is Latinized as Brigantes. So he connects Breoghan with Brigantes directly, again connecting Breoghan to the same root via the established etymology of Brigantes/Brigantia, which comes from the Piebhergh that we just saw on Wiktionary. So numerous details connect Breoghan to the root brich and to the meaning of strength that it carries. As stated, Breoghan is also called alternately Brigus. So the name Brigus is just used for Breoghan. In the general Spanish history of Lovois, mentioned by Keating as being noted by Edward Grimston. So Keating is noting Edward Grimston, noting Laboise. And in that version that he's referencing, Breoghan is just called Brigus. And that can be found in the History of Ireland, volume 2, I believe, 3870, or Keating section 18. Okay. Brigus is a version of the Proto-Celtic form of this word, brigos, as we saw in the Proto-Celtic, or rather, it's not a Proto-Celtic word necessarily, although it could be, once again, some of these names can be fossilized from an earlier layer, but nonetheless, we saw that Brigus is connected to, I should rather say, it's a derivation from what we see as the Proto-Celtic root, or rather word, brigos, meaning strength, derived from Bhergh in a more obvious manner than Breoghan is. So that gives us sort of a strong piece of the puzzle. We thus have direct attestation that an alternate name of Breoghan, Brigus, was a name even more clearly deriving from the shared root with Brahman, Bhergh. Breoghan himself is called a sky of strength in the medieval poem called Nuada Necht, which is translated by Kuno Meyer. And if you search Nuada Necht, translated Kuno Meyer, in Google, this poem will come up. It's available online. And you can see that Breoghan gets one description, essentially. It says, Breoghan, a sky of strength. And the word for strength there is indeed Brige. So he basically says, Breoghan, a sky of brich. Very interesting, right? That is a medieval poem. So, and that brich, as we saw, is from the same root. Again, it is the same word for strength in Irish. This further ties Breoghan to the etymology brich, meaning strength, power, authority, which derives from the aforementioned shared root with Brahman. The spelling of Breoghan is very inconsistent in different versions, different manuscripts. It has many forms. We very often find Breoghan without the H, Bregon, Bregan, Bregoin, Brigus, and also at least one case where it has Brechthan, among other variations, all interchangeably referring to this same figure, who is the lord of the Tower of Brigantia, who has the same son name, so you know it's the same figure with the same story regarding what he does. So yes, it's quite clear. These are just variations of one name and one figure. So bringing together the full set of alternate spellings of Breoghan's name helps to rule out the alternate etymology suggested by O'Mahony, that of Breo. So O'Mahony suggested it as a second possibility. What if, it could come from Breo, meaning fire, but that gets essentially ruled out by when you see all the names of Breoghan, all the variants of it, they cannot all, some of them cannot derive from Breo, essentially. So the only etymology that could best agree with all the forms and pronunciations of his name that we have would have to be Breich, from Pie, Bhegergh. Only some of these spellings of Breoghan's name. So yeah, also only some of the spellings of Breoghan's name have an O in the EO part, the central O, and that's the only spelling that would tie the name to Breo, right? So if some of the versions are like EA, Brechthan, Brigus, Bregan without the O, Bregan, those don't appear to be coming from Breo as its root. It would make no sense for this spread of names to come from the root being Breo. Instead, it looks like at least one version of the name went through the diphthongization that we saw, that even O'Mahony points out is a thing that happens. So it's not strange at all for one of the versions, at least, to have undergone diphthongization to add an O, but it would make no sense for all of these to come from Breo as the root, and then to have lost the EO in most of the versions. It just doesn't, it essentially could not happen. I would like to suggest, okay. This suggests that the O was not fundamental to the pronunciation of and etymology of the original name, meaning, the original name didn't have this O, and that the occasional appearance of the O in some variations of the name falls within the normal commutation of long E and EO that even O'Mahony noted. Another of the name forms of Breoghan found in the manuscripts is Brechthan, which is connected to the Old Irish word bricht or brecht, meaning incantation or spell. The IGH into CHT change is not a random thing here either. It is very typical in Old Irish to see IGH turn into CHT. So you can see Breich becoming Bricht or Brecht. Which also becomes modern Irish Briocht, whose genitive singular form is Brechta. So that's interesting, right? We see Brechthan, we see Brie become Bricht and Brecht, Briocht, and then also even Brechta. And we see that one of the names of Breoghan is Brechthan. I'll zoom up here again, but Brechthan, like that. And then, yes, the genitive singular of this word is Brechta. I wonder if I can pull that up at all, but I'm not sure. I'll just show you this for the evidence, but we have Old Irish Bricht from Proto-Celtic Brixtus, and yes, there's also Bhergh. So they trace it to Bhergh, which they say means to enlighten. See, they're playing fast and loose with what the meaning itself is, because you can see from what Gonda was arguing that it depends what you emphasize, what meaning, but really it's just these different meanings deriving from an original root meaning, okay, which had to do with the expanding power, as we saw in the Wiktionary. What my point here is, Wiktionary is being rather shallow. with the meaning side of things. We saw from the scholars themselves, like Whitney says, growth power, or whatever he said. Monier Williams, commenting on the meaning of Brahman itself, growth, etc. Gonda pointing out that the meaning of the root of Brahman is more to do with power, exalted power, and exaltation connected to it. And so, so saying that it just means to rise up or ascend, this is placing more emphasis on the height aspect of things, which some scholars have defaulted to because of the words that mean like a high hill and things like that, like we said. And that's exactly what Gonda is critiquing. Okay, tangent, but the point is, Wiktionary, you should look at let's look at the scholars themselves and the dictionaries themselves. Wiktionary sometimes it is summarizing a bunch of scholars, and so using a more vague catch-all, I think. That's why it's a bit strange to see, like, they say it means to enlighten on this version. When it comes from Brixtus, they're saying this means to enlighten, but then they say it means to ascend. They're not quite sure how to define it because it's a bit debated, okay? It's a bit debated, and they're trying to summarize a bunch of different scholarly voices, so that's difficult. Okay, but the point here is the most important thing, the word bricht, according to scholars, does come from BHERGH, the same root once again, meaning charm spell. Okay, and you can see why, because Brahman also means a sacred formulation or even a spell, mantra spell in Sanskrit. And so that's fascinating. But there it is. You can trace the pathway where it becomes Brixtus, and then it becomes Bricht in Old Irish, Bricht in Middle Irish, then Briocht in Modern Irish, and then you can see different forms like Breachtrav. You can see the EA emerging in different versions there. Breachtrav for spell work. That's interesting. And then, as I said, the genitive singular form is Breachta. Okay, so you can see that it's just interesting to see this EA, the E kind of shifts there. So that's interesting. All right, let's go back to this. So from the Edil entry for Bricht, it says it is not always distinct from Brecht. Bricht and Brecht. So there's this change from I to E, or these two words that are conflated, or the relationship between those is not clear, particularly in metrical applications. Bricht, Druav, also Brechta, Briocht, and Drowidrecht. So, druidry, druid work. That's like spell work, like we saw. Okay. But yeah, it's interesting to see the different forms of it, I guess. Bricht becomes, Brecht, Brechta, and Briocht. And then, yeah, you can see how you get similar changes in the name of Breoghan, where you see Bregan, Breghan, or Bregan, and then Breachthon. You can see the similar pattern emerging in both, and so that helps to support that they are paired in a way. That this Bricht word is paired with Breoghan in a similar way that Brahman, as a sacred formulation, is paired with Brahman as the supreme being or supreme reality, power, etc. So also see the words mlich and blich, meaning to milk, becoming blicht/blecht, meaning milk, and mlicht/mlecht, meaning dairy. Okay, so this is some of the common changes of GH. This is just an example. I'm sure there's others of GH. GH can change to the CH and the I to the E, and also the E to the EO. O'Mahony already gave examples of that, but there's another possible example, depending on how these, there's some unclarity on how these milk words are related to one another. Okay, but nonetheless, you see the variation of these in a similar way. So from this word blich, meaning to milk, the verbal noun that potentially developed from it and is still used, Breoghan. Breoghan. And so that mirrors the possible development of Breoghan. That's the point there, right? If blich becomes Breoghan, then yes, brich can become Breoghan, and it would not be strange. Let's see if I can pull this up. So yeah, like I said, Breoghan, this is Scottish Gaelic, just to be clear. And you can see mlich, mlichid. It's originally mlich, mlichid with an I. You can see it right there. Mlichid with an I from a B. Okay, it's kind of confusing the pathway. Okay, so blechon. So you have mlichid becomes blechon becomes bleochan. The sound changes mirror brich becoming bregon and also breochan. Okay, it's very similar. It is a parallel example rather than an absolute proof of these connections. It is a parallel example showing the possibility, and that this explains the full spread of the names of Breoghan much better than any alternate etymology, and that's the point. So this demonstrates how the I in such a word can change to E and to EO, along with the shift from the GH to CHT, and this perfectly parallels the suggested path of the variations Breochan or Breachtan. In the case of Bleochan, the addition of suffix on to make blich into a verbal noun triggered the vowel lowering and diphthongization from I to EO. As Breachtan, that is Breochan, is linguistically related to the word bricht, incantation, magical formula. See also Breachtrad, a form of the same word meaning spell work. Similarly, there is the word Brahman in Vedic Sanskrit, a variation of the word Brahman, which means prayer or sacred word of power formulation. So we have in Gaelic the being who is Breachtan and the incantation that is Bricht or Brecht. As we have in the Vedas, the absolute Brahman and the incantation Brahman, lowercase. Thus, Brahman is to Brahman as Breachtan is to Brecht/Bricht, and the harmony of this parallelism reinforces the claim that Breachtan or Breochan does equal Brahman, each of these deriving from their shared root that we have shown the evidence for. Thus, in Gaelic, as in Sanskrit, the direct connection of the name of the purported absolute, Brahman or Breachtan, to the term for the magical word, Brahman or Bricht, is retained. This pattern is retained, the intimate connection of these two concepts and two words, with the absolute's name being nearly the same as the term for magic word or formulation in both the Gaelic and Vedic Sanskrit cases. Bricht comes from BH, as we just saw in Wiktionary. And so the form of the name Breachtan also would come from BH, as both the Brahman names likewise do. Once more strengthening the case that all of the Breachtan names, though varying in spelling over time, originally derived from B superscript H, ERG superscript H, and are thereby related to the name Brahman as distinct forms from the same root. So the point there is Breochan and Brahman are slightly different forms. a different, like I said, it might be that one is a participle, let's see, one is an abstract noun, one is a participle potentially. Okay, so that's something that can be debated and argued about how exactly did one form and what type of word was this form versus that form. But the point is we can show they came from the same root by the best account of all the evidence and even what all the scholars are saying on each point. Um, it all points to the fact that they most likely do come from the same root, but they're just different word form, different forms of the same root, or different forms of the same name, which may have, if this mythologically was consistent all the way to Proto-Indo-European, we should not discount the possibility that there was a single name as an ancestor of both, and that they were either, that there was fossil carry through at some level, and therefore we have to understand that there's a couple different possibilities, that they were sort of that the name was reformulated at each level, or at certain different periods of time, from that root. Different versions of the name obviously develop, as we even see in Irish, multiple different versions. But it could be that, yes, it was reformulated in Old Irish, or at whatever stage, from the root brig. We can see the pathway that can happen. It could come straight from the Old Irish brig. Alternately, there could be some carry through of a fossil of this name, and I don't see how that can entirely be set aside if this is a consistent tradition, that there would be a name carried down. And in that case, it would be a reshaping of that name through this same pathway that we see this reshaping occur in these other words. And therefore, Breoghan would be directly tied to that root Brig, and the people would understand, they obviously understood this connection to that root, but the reshaping of that fossil name, yeah, has a more interesting, it adds a wrinkle, it adds a complexity to how Breoghan could have developed, and what that suffix part of his name really was, what it really stood for. Is it just a survival of what a name, a sacred name, becomes its own thing? You don't think of it as a suffix, perhaps. If you inherited the name Breoghan from the Proto-Celtic time, or from Proto-Indo-European time, for the name is just a sacred name, and you perhaps understand its relationship to the root meaning Brig, but the suffix an can lose its meaning, or at least its original meaning, and then it can be reshaped in different ways that are sometimes unpredictable. So you can't fully know. I would say something to discuss, right? Something very interesting, I think, to discuss. What seems more likely to you? That we had this Breghons, however it would have been pronounced in Proto-Indo-European, and that carried through and was slightly reshaped here and there over the centuries, and then went through Old Irish speech pattern changes, sound changes, to become Breoghan, and therefore the an is just a survival of the extremely ancient onts, and therefore as an Old Irish suffix, it doesn't carry specific meaning that they even necessarily would have understood, and it originally would have just meant the one who is that. It just means the Breg one. So that's one possibility. I think that has to be a possibility, unless there is a good reason why that doesn't make sense. And then, but the other option is that it comes from Brig directly in Old Irish or Primitive Irish or something, and then they added a suffix, or it went through some sound change like this, some sort of grammatical change, in the same way Bleach became Bleochan. Some kind of it had some grammatical. It is some kind of grammatical marker, or the suffix that is a diminutive. It's a bit odd to me that it would be a diminutive. That's one of the reasons why I'm wondering whether that's the best explanation, because if it's a diminutive, it's a bit strange to call, the Brahman the little strong, the little vast, strong, exalted one. It could be a way of calling it in a familiar way, like the deer one, which would make sense with the alternate name that is Tat, meaning Papa or Dad. So that's a possibility if it is something like that. But if it's a fossil, you wouldn't have to worry about that sort of thing. It could be a suffix that's just part of like a sacred name. The name Yahweh doesn't change over 2,500 years or whatever, 3,000 years, whatever you want to say. The name Yahweh itself isn't being derived today from our current language, from the root, and even its underlying etymological meaning is not fully understood. But new etymological descriptions are being attached to it, or even in the Bible are attributed to it, what have you, however you want to think about it. A sacred name can be fossilized for thousands of years and can be, in the oral tradition, may have just been slightly reshaped over time. So I think that has to be a possibility. But the outstanding, outcome of this, though, is that there are basically two, if not more, ways to derive Breoghan from either Breich or from a more ancient form of the same root. And because there are these two pretty much clear possibilities, there's strong reason to think it comes from that root. That's the real upshot. To me, I don't mind. I want to hear what people think is the most likely of those possibilities, but it gives leeway. It gives a couple. It could be derived by more than one route and still make sense because of all this other evidence that I presented. So it should also be mentioned that Breoghan has sons named Brig/Brigi. Those are very clearly from Bri, right? And Brega, both of which come once again from the root BHERGH, B superscript H, ER, G superscript H, and mean strong and fine in themselves. These names reinforce the numerous surrounding elements tying Breoghan closely to the Proto-Indo-European root B superscript H, ER, G superscript H etymology. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. And like I said, I know some of my explanations of the very fine points of the linguistics are not perfect or as beautiful as a linguist would be able to explain this. But I do challenge any linguist to say the fundamentals of what I just presented are incorrect. And would love to hear it, of course, because I think the evidence I'm presenting here is so broad, covering the meaning, covering how the meaning is consistent with strength, power, etc., and connecting that to how these sound changes, we can see them happening in Irish to output this particular spread of variants of the name. And only this root can really explain that particular set of variants. And it is supported by scholars such as the translator of Keating. And it's not like what I'm presenting is going against any consensus or scholar out there about this either. It is basically just there's not a lot of other than Brigantia. We can see that Brigantia, it's pretty clearly scholars believe it comes from this same root, but nobody really looks at Breoghan that closely. So for that reason, there's not a clear scholarly voice about this, other than these old translators and things like that, like O'Mahony, who say that it comes from this same root. So we can see the evidence for ourselves. Anyone can look at that evidence, and you can debate whether if this part, like if you would change anything about what the exact PIE predecessor of Breoghan would have looked like, whether it looks more like Breoghan was derived directly from Old Irish Breich or was a fossil name that was being reshaped through the sound laws of Old Irish, and what that means for the suffix. Those are all interesting questions. But even regardless of how you come down on that, you can see that it's all pointing in this direction of his alternate name is Brigus, which means the strong one, from the same root. And this is all just supporting the mythological evidence, which I think on its own, as I was discussing, I think Cahill in the Patreon was asking about this. It's a really important question and a good question, but he was saying like it's sort of like the clincher, or I don't think he said clincher, but it's it is having the etymological pathway. It's a strong nail in the construction of the argument. It is a cherry on top to have clearly that this is a clear path etymologically, linguistically, and that this broad set of types of evidence are all supporting this, a consistent pattern between the word for incantation and the word for strength/hill and the name of the Brahman figure are related in a similar way in both. All the sound changes are evidenced elsewhere and can be explained, as even translators like O'Mahony agree and point out themselves. So it's not just me. It's not just me saying this. It's kind of what the point of this all is. I will suggest that Breoghan, that by all available evidence, the best evidence that is available, Breoghan should and seems to come from the same root as Brahman linguistically. There's nothing that I'm really going against in that, other than the lack of clarity, the difficulty of this being proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, and sort of the lack of scholarly work on this. But it's not just me saying this. I'm basing this on the other translators and dictionaries and what they all are supporting. And then that, like I said, that is just supporting, strengthening the mythological case, which to me is strong on its own and proves the case mythologically on its own. Even if Breoghan's name was not, if Breoghan's name was just Tat or what have you, something vague, I would still make this argument and think it was strong mythologically, comparative mythologically, because he is the Lord of the Tower. He is at the beginning of a seam of a story. His sons, two out of his sons, their names and their actions embody this parallelism between the dark waters and the sacred tree, which are non-being and being. From that sacred tree god, the very same equivalent creation myth acts unfold. That all points to Breoghan being at this, the father of being and non-being is like the Brahman. And so whatever his name was, mythologically, it's all supported in a complex way. He's also the very first name in the genealogies of the Corco Loigda, a major aristocratic kingly dynasty or lineage, family of clan, or rather clan, of course, clans. And so mythologically on its own, Breoghan is in the role of the Brahman type. He fulfills what the Brahman would be and do. And so the linguistic path being clear and being the strongest explanation of all the evidence available, basically is the cherry on top, is a final strong link to demonstrate something that cannot be scientifically absolutely proven. So asking for, show me the exact evidence and the proof that that Breoghan comes from the same root. You can only make a strong argument. And yes, I have. I await something that I await an argument that explains this set of evidence in a different way, more fully, more strongly, that would discount what I'm saying. I think it stands on its own fairly strongly. So, with that, I'm going to wrap up, and hopefully that made some sense. The Brahman is supported by this Irish evidence, of course, right? The meaning of strength and power comes through directly in Brigus in Breoghan. Breoghan's name then essentially means the same as Brigus, more or less, right? And it means the strong one, or the powerful one, or the powerful slash exalted one. You know, the meaning of exaltation may have been implied, implicit in like a sort of exalted power, maybe like the original meaning, or power of expansion, power of growth. Of course, some of the Sanskrit dictionaries like the word meaning of growth. It's a nice word. So that is all implied with power of growth, power that makes strong, therefore the strong one, etc. That being the sort of semantic field, that being the meaning that carries through most strongly with Breoghan, the Irish version, the Irish figure who is in this role that matches what the Brahman is, and that is linked to the same root word. That suggests that Jan Gonda was probably right about power and strength, and whatever his specific wording, of course, there was more precise and nuanced. But it seems that this confirms what he was saying. If you find an example of this in myth, in Irish myth, far away, across the world from a shared root, with a figure fulfilling the same role, and the meanings attached to this word are very blatantly power, strength, and flowing from that magical power, magical spell, and the expansiveness, expansive power of what a hill and a height is, and all of these things as extensions of this meaning. That suggests that Gonda was probably on the right track, that the Proto-Indo-European root, or rather, he's talking about only the Sanskrit root, the Vedic root, that it meant something more connected to power, growth power, expansive power, and all of these things, and strength. And that, yes, that probably, because it's shared with the Irish, that probably was the meaning at the Proto-Indo-European level as well. That Gonda was probably correct. It's sort of a mutually supporting set of evidence when you have this sort of thing. And if that's the case, it is a strong set of evidence to suggest the possibility that the Proto-Indo-European meaning root word had a similar meaning to this, that it was more connected to exalted, sublime, an exalted power, a power that causes exaltation and growth, and that secondarily means a hill. A hill is a symbol of that, and a high place is embodies that, is an embodiment of that, and therefore it becomes the word. It yields the words for hills and high places. The high one, the exalted high one. It really means an exalted, powerful, expansive place. Okay. That's the argument from Gonda, and the argument from Breoghan, and they mutually reinforce one another. And so, yeah, I think this is an important, crucial thing to understand. It's very lengthy, and I encourage everyone to look into it for yourself and see what you think, and tell me what you think. And so thank you to everyone for listening. I'm going to see if there's any questions before I go. Other theory is that it comes from a similar origin as the word Scythian. Oh, okay. That's a different word. Okay. You're talking about a different word there. I see. Scotus, Scotland. Okay. That's interesting. I'm not sure about the meaning of the word Scotland, or the root word. So that is a great question. But that would be another linguistic adventure. I don't know how much people like to hear me talking about linguistic adventures, the challenge here is I'm a comparative mythologist. I consult with people who are more linguists and consult with dictionaries, but they give me linguistic counsel and advising. But some of it is their suggestions, and I want to take from them what works with comparative mythology and builds my case. Therefore, I don't want to, if I make any errors, or if there's any errors in how that fits into the picture, it shouldn't be attributable to people who are just giving me advising on linguistics. But on the flip side, I have to then be the one presenting it, and I'm not able to provide the level of linguistic detail and exactness that a linguist would. But on the other hand, the linguist would not be able to present the integration of that material into the comparative mythology, and I wouldn't want to ask them to take the responsibility of its correctness or not, if it's like my larger theory that I'm drawing it into. Does that make sense? So I'm forced to be the one to present this, even though it should be a linguist explaining the finer points. So it is what it is. And yeah, it should be from this hopefully clear that it's not just me saying Breoghan comes from the shared root with Brahman. Really, I think it is by far, the strongest, supported by all the broad set of the evidence, and we should even try to build that case stronger, or see what else there is to see what other thoughts and alternatives people have. Of course, things to challenge or correct or say that part is wrong. Go for it. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions, anyone? I'm going to wrap this up here. And yeah, I appreciate you guys for being interested in this topic. The Brahman is, of course, the supreme absolute, but it's being called by this name. They're telling you that they see it as a sublime power, or the source of power, sublime source of power. That's why it is instrumentalized by the priests in the sacred formulations, which are words of power, magic spells, magic incantations of power, and all of that. And that's why sometimes people who look at the Rig Veda will say the Brahman seems to just mean word of power. Maybe that's just what it originally meant. But I think it's, they're intimately tied, but the word is the embodiment of the power in that way. This is also interesting in Platonistic terms, because I know Plotinus, and I think Plato also, but regardless, in the Platonic tradition, the one, the absolute, is described as the productive power of all. So they use the word power, and you can, let's see, I guess I can just look that up right now. I'm trying to remember the exact Greek word. It's dunamis, so that makes sense, of course, like dynamic. So it is the dunamis panton, according to Plotinus in I guess 3.8.10.1 and 5.1.7. All right, so Plotinus says the one is the productive power of all things, the dunamis power. If we're looking at this in a mythological sense, this is from the same original Indo-European or perennial, what have you, root, mythological root, as the Brahman. And so we should listen to the fact that the Vedics are saying this name, Brahman, and it basically means the power, the powerful one, the powerful thing, if it's an abstract noun, the power or source of power, could be, if you prefer. But power of all things, it's, growth power, expansive power. Those are, of course, different ways to state it, or connotations. But this ties together the underlying philosophical and mythological material to suggest that the absolute in these shared traditions was being called the power of all, and that this was a consistent, established philosophical and mythological theological viewpoint, going back to Proto-Indo-European times, and that's why it's coming out in Platonism, Vedism, and as we can see, in Breoghan of the Gaels. All right, I'm gonna stop there. You can think about that and what that means, because it's important to understand what is the absolute. Of course, it can't be reduced to power. It's like it is the powerful one, but we see there's a lot more to what that means. What does that mean to be the power above power, in a sense? It is the good, of course. In Plato's terms, it is Trevolniath Treocher. He measures. He is the source of measurement. He's Enda. Breoghan is also Enda, as we saw in our Enda stream. He is the pillar. He's the Lord of the pillar. He's beyond being and non-being. And yes. Okay. All right. Yes, we'll end with yes. So have a great day, everyone. And thanks for listening. Thanks for this. I want to have this as just a resource for people who are really, really interested in this topic and say, is Breoghan really from the same root as Brahman? Where's the evidence? Well, at the very minimum, I gave you a bunch of the dictionaries that you can look at for yourself and trace this path and see that the path is wide open. It is supported by the scholars and by the other evidence that I bring together. And therefore, Breoghan is cognate of Brahman, a different formation of the same root or same name, fossilized, different formations coming out in extremely similar looking and sounding forms. Breoghan, Brahman. It's incredible, I think, how close those ended up being. Breoghan, Breoghan, of course, are variants. All right, have a great one. I got to get running, and please send me your questions if interested. Thanks.